The Sequoia National Park, located in California, attracts over 1 million visitors every year and is home to ancient and some of the largest trees in the world. This area is vast, and 97% of the park's land is considered wilderness, so it's no surprise that people have vanished in this place. However, there are some disappearances that managed to baffle searchers who couldn't make sense of the circumstances. Let's begin by discussing the first disappearance that interested me almost immediately after reading it for reasons you'll come to see in a moment. This happened to Andrew Thackerson, who was 5 years old at the time, on the 17th of August 1953. On that day, his parents had decided to visit the park with their 3 boys, 9, 7, and obviously the focus of this report, Andrew. In the very first report, there was little information, only that Andrew had disappeared next to the General Sherman tree. For those that don't know, this tree is ancient, having now reached 2,200 years and is the largest tree in the world as measured by volume. It stands at 275 feet tall and 36 feet in diameter. As they were standing next to this tree in awe at the sight, Andrew managed to vanish right under the noses of his parents, and they had absolutely no idea how or what had happened. They were alone at the time, with no one else nearby, and they hadn't heard Andrew shout or anything of that nature. The parents, growing nervous, began to call for Andrew, and the father scouted deep into the trees to retrieve his son, but there was nothing but a deafening silence. Panicking now, the family rushed to report this incident to the authorities, and action was taken swiftly. A search team was put together that reached the size of 150 men within 24 hours. And together, they began to sweep the area using a grid search method. Various bloodhound teams were scattered around this area, and despite the parents providing Andrew's clothing to them, the dogs weren't able to find a scent, and as far as I can tell, they were in the forest areas overnight. Now, despite that, I do just want to say that this incident thankfully did have a happy ending. However, Andrew managed to confuse everyone involved. Searchers today found Andrew sleeping peacefully, unharmed and well on a mountain trail in Sequoia National Park, where he had been missing since yesterday morning. Temporary Ranger Carl Kronberg headed the search party of 20 persons who came across Andrew in the Panther Meadow region. He was 3 miles from the spot where he wandered away from his parents. Kronberg found Andrew lying face down on the trail, sleeping. He was checked at a hospital and found to be in good shape, despite spending a night in the forest where temperatures may drop to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Some outlets reported that this distance that he was found was actually 6 miles, and there seems to be an even number reporting the 2 figures, so it's not completely clear which is the case. However, that distance wasn't the most surprising fact. Despite Andrew being found within 24 hours, this was a difficult search to undertake because the area was still mountainous. It was said to be very rugged and had steep areas all over the place. Despite that, Carl estimated that Andrew had been walking aimlessly for around 12 miles, and other searchers estimated an even higher figure than that, with some saying up to 18 miles. That is staggering and simply unbelievable to think that a 5-year-old could walk that far in an area like this in 24 hours. That doesn't make sense to me, nor did it make sense to some of the searchers, and it seems to me that most adults are going to struggle with a feat like this, especially when you consider the terrain. There were searchers involved that knew that this was odd and felt that there must have been more information to know. But because Andrew was found, there wasn't much discussion on it in the press, past the surprise and confusion shown by the searchers. Though I'm sure between themselves they discussed all kinds of scenarios. But it just seems that when a person is found, that's the end of it, and no further conversations take place. Andrew never gave a statement to the press, which was probably a good decision for the parents to have made, because you don't want him to dwell on the experience, because these kinds of events can cause a lot of trauma if you're not careful, especially for someone so young. I'm sure his parents did have a lot of questions for him though. I'm also not even sure how much of this he'd actually remember, given that he was out of it and dazed upon being found. There was probably a lot of shock going on there. These discussions may have been important though, because the distance travelled in the end could indicate that he wasn't alone. Though despite the surprising distance, there wasn't anything else in the way of evidence to support either being moved by another person or an animal. And also, if it was an animal, you probably wouldn't have expected him to have been found, at least safe. Thankfully, Andrew was found and in good condition, but it certainly seems that some of the searchers wanted to know more about this and what had happened. What are your thoughts here? There is unfortunately a frustrating lack of information and understanding of this next disappearance, but it is most certainly deserving of being brought up again. Philip Ahrens, who was 42 years old at the time, was reported missing by his brother on the 7th of September 2005 in the park. The pair of them were on a multi-day hiking trip which began at Mineral King, and it was supposed to end there too after completing a loop. Now, during this hike, Philip began to feel unwell and the pair hiked and came out at a different trailhead. At this point, Philip's brother told him to stay put right there while he hitchhiked a ride back to where the car was parked so he could swing back around, pick up Philip and then drive them both home. Philip agreed and got comfortable with his backpack, which had supplies including water, and this round trip for the brother would unfortunately take around 5 hours in total to make it back to Philip's location. When the brother finally got back, he realised that Philip just wasn't around anymore, and he began to poke into the forest calling for him, but not once did he ever receive a reply. As far as I can tell also, there wasn't anyone else present, just the pair of them before Philip was alone for 5 hours. Initial searches near Crescent Meadow, the area in which Philip was last seen by his brother, were narrowed down to a point off the Sugar Pine Trail after search teams located the missing man's sunglasses, said Alexandra Picavet of the National Park Service. The area has heavy vegetation and steep embankments, making search conditions difficult, she said. More than 40 ground searchers, mounted patrol, a dog team, employees and volunteers combed the area for days along with the aid of a helicopter crew. Philip's body was found late Saturday at the bottom of a steep embankment near Crescent Creek, less than a mile from the Crescent Meadow parking area. Officials believe he may have passed away due to exposure. The article then went on to explain that officials had absolutely no idea why Philip left the area. While the cause of passing wasn't completely clear, and an official conclusion was never published by the press, it is likely that it was down to exposure, given that his body was found 3 days after the date of disappearance, and, I assume, had seemingly sustained no injuries, or that would have been mentioned, and the cause a little more obvious if a fall or something like that had taken place. Now, what is odd about this is why Philip felt the need to move in the first place. You have a situation in which Philip was sat comfortably waiting for his brother. He had supplies, shade, water, and he felt unwell, so it's hard to imagine that all of a sudden he wanted to go on some long solo hike. Yet still, for some unknown reason that the authorities could never determine, he decided it best to move out from this spot into the rugged, hazardous and steep surrounding areas away from the trail. Why? There was no other press reports that I could find about this, but it certainly seems like a piece of information is missing here. Given that they found his sunglasses, it also seems like he began to abandon items, or perhaps was moving a little too quickly and dropped them. That also seems like it warrants a conversation. Could he have been afraid? He dropped them and didn't bother retrieving them, which means that in that moment it just wasn't important. Was there another presence nearby that essentially made him feel uncomfortable, and perhaps not so physically pushed him away from the car park and into a more remote area to get away? This is interesting because it's unlikely to have been an animal in this instance, because there would have been clear evidence upon finding the body if that were the case. Instead, we have a situation where this man was found, I'm assuming uninjured given the description by authorities to the press. I have no doubt, as is the suggestion, that after a while he became lost and then later expired due to exposure. But that does not seem like the whole story. he got up and moved for a reason that was never determined. Again, it seems to me that there's a missing piece of information here, and something that we don't know occurred in between the brother hitchhiking and driving back to his brother. His family described him as an avid backpacker and climber and loved ice climbing. He also liked canoeing, fishing and backpacking with his dog. So this was a man that was comfortable and experienced in the outdoors, given he'd been doing his favourite activities for so long. That, sadly, is the end of the paper trail, and there was barely any reporting on Philip, leaving us with another example of someone inexplicably and for seemingly no apparent reason leaving and disappearing into the forest. What happened here? Now, let's talk about the disappearance of Barbara McGee, 38, who also disappeared in this land. Barbara booked a week's solo vacation where she rented a cabin at Giant Forest, which is located not far away from Crescent Meadow where Philip disappeared. This took place on the 22nd of June, 1965, and it seems at that time Barbara just wanted to get away for a while, but unfortunately had not made plans to update anyone on how she was getting on. This means that she unfortunately wasn't reported missing until a week had passed, and it was only realised when she never got on the bus to go home. A 2-day search has failed to turn up a trace of Barbara, who vanished from her cottage at Giant Forest. Rangers said her personal belongings, including her pocketbook and money, were found in her cabin. A large quantity of food was also discovered, indicating that Barbara had not been in the cabin long before she disappeared. The findings inside the cabin was really bad news, because as authorities and rangers were trying to come up with possible scenarios as to what happened, they realised that the cabin had barely been used and came to the conclusion that she had likely vanished within hours of arriving at the park. Meaning that Barbara had been lost for the entire week and the search was only now just beginning. Barbara has not been seen by neighbours in a nearby cabin since the date of arrival. It was reported by District Ranger Paul Turner. Rangers have searched nearby trails without result. A lot of people may cast the neighbours in a negative light for not reporting anything sooner, but they would have had no idea that anything was wrong. Shortly after receiving this information, another lead came through to the Rangers. Professional mountain climbers were airlifted into the rugged Panther Gap area, leading to 11,000 foot Alta Peak above Giant Forest this morning, on reports that Barbara had been sighted there last week. The searchers were placed there following reports from a hiker that he had seen a woman of Barbara's description on the 22nd, which is the arrival date. This hiker told them that Barbara had asked him for directions to Alta Peak Trail, and after giving her the information and pointing her in the right direction, she thanked him and went on her way. Make no mistake, the searchers for the most part believed that they were looking for a body, considering the time that had already passed at this stage. But they had good news in the sense that there was now a central point from which to place the focus of the search. Searchers began to scour the Crescent Meadow area, which I believe the trail was either in or passed through, and as said, is also where Philip disappeared all those years after this event. The search leader also made it clear that all trails inside the Giant Forest had been searched, but not even a single clue was found, which made searchers feel certain that she wasn't in that area, so now we're eager to search Crescent Meadow. What was particularly confusing and troubling to the searchers was the fact that all trails in this area were fairly well travelled, and yet absolutely no one had seen Barbara after she received directions, so clearly something bad happened very shortly after this event. 40 men today resumed the search in rugged Panther Gap for Barbara. Thursday's search by the same group was terminated at dark. "We're out of leads," Chief Forest Ranger Peter Schuff said. The searchers were growing frustrated because they were hoping to find some sort of indication that might help explain what happened to Barbara. They didn't believe animal predation had occurred because that kind of evidence is usually found and it's not so discreet. There was also no evidence to suggest foul play, but when you're in a situation such as this, that's always going to be difficult to find. It seems that once they narrowed down the final location she'd been, they weren't just expecting to find nothing. They knew for certain that she wasn't on the trail, so this means that for some reason, As was the case with Philip, she left it, but no one had any inclination as to why this might have happened. Searchers said that the trails are well marked and it wouldn't be easy to simply stray away without noticing as the area gets rugged quickly. So, the same question as was asked in Philip's disappearance must be asked again. Why did Barbara leave the trail? If the searchers are saying that it's highly unlikely that she would have simply strayed away from the trail, what does that leave us with? As I suspected in Philip's case, could there have been an element of fear involved here? Did she feel, for whatever reason, that it would be safer to leave the trail and head into the more rugged areas? We'll obviously never know the answer to that now, as far too much time has passed. Frustrated in their 10-day search for Barbara, today they decided to start again from scratch. Pete Schuff said we're putting 20 men on the search today. We are going to centre the search at Barbara's cabin and work an area within a 2-mile radius. We are going to meticulously search every foot of this area. We've only had one lead and have run it down without results, so we're going to start all over again and retrace all of our previous efforts. Of course, as he pointed out there, this had already occurred once, and after completing the search again, nothing was found. Ultimately, as you can probably imagine in this case, Barbara was never found, as was no trace of her presence ever located either. This is one of those disappearances that highlights how crucial communication is. Had plans have been made to either phone home or check in with neighbouring cabins, the search could have been started far sooner, and I hope that at the very least, this disappearance serves as a warning and a lesson to be learned from. If you have any plans to head into these kinds of areas, please do let people know. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around and disappearing on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell and subscribe if you haven't already. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys. Peace.